Tonight on See You at USC, Irshad Manji is here. I'll ask her about our event coming up on USC's campus called Forbidden Questions About Islam. And we'll ask some of those forbidden questions, not just about Islam, to the woman the New York Times once called Osama bin Laden's worst enemy. That's coming up right here on Trojan Vision. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to See You at USC. My name is Cole Sullivan. Thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for being here as well. We really appreciate you sticking around for this second show.
My pleasure.
So I want to start a little bit of background, perhaps a little bit of a broad question. How did you get to where you are today? I know you're originally, you came from Canada, originally not from Canada. What's your background? What's your history?
Oh my God, it's all over the place. So, born in East Africa, specifically the country of Uganda. Family and I booted out by a military dictator named Idi Amin. We wound up in Canada. I was only 4 years old, and I grew up on the West Coast, as it turns out, in Vancouver, attending both the religious school, my faith being Muslim, Islam, and also public school. Learned a whole lot, my friend, about the difference between education, which is what I got at public school, and indoctrination, which is what I got at religious school. Was kicked out at the age of 14 from religious school for asking one too many inconvenient questions, but decided, look, why should I let a religious teacher tell me what is possible and what is not? So I took the time to study Islam on my own and came to realize there are so many more possibilities here than what I'm being taught. And so I studied Islam, for years and years and years, all the while being a TV producer, a TV presenter, etc. And then when 9/11 happened, I decided that this was the moment in which the world is now paying attention to Islam, for better or for worse. And so I can finally write the book that had been percolating in me for 25 years. And that book is called The Trouble with Islam Today, a Muslim's call for reform in her faith. And it's an open letter to my fellow Muslims about why we need to stick our necks out to ignite reform within our faith of Islam. And by the way, Colm, by reform, I simply mean reconciling faith and freedom. Went on book tour, which actually turned out to be a 10-year global conversation.
Wow. And
that is when I grew like nobody's business from the criticisms that were leveled at me. And I have to tell you that it is that experience that brings me to the point today of being an educator at USC and really embracing what is called moral courage, which means doing the right thing in the face of your fears, including the fear of being called a racist or a bigot or an Islamophobe for asking uncomfortable, taboo questions, and also the fear of receiving those questions, because you may be afraid that somebody is coming from a place of hostility when in fact, if you engage them, you might learn that they're actually coming from a place of curiosity.
So I want to take you back to the name of your book, right?
Okay.
The Problem with Islam.
The Trouble with Islam Today.
What is the trouble with Islam today?
So in a word, Muslims. We Muslims are the trouble with Islam today. And yes, I know that can be said about Christianity, that Christians are the trouble with Christianity today. Jews are the trouble with Judaism today. And that's the point, that there are no shortage of books about, the problem within sort of Judeo-Christian religious thought. We Muslims have a lot of catching up to do in the dissent department. And, the Quran, as I learned from all those years of self-study, contains so many more progressive verses than we are being taught as young Muslims and that we're willing to teach others.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think that some of the kind of more hardline verses are the ones being taught and dissent is not as welcome as it is in other faiths?
So the short answer to that is power, pure and simple. That those who have become the clerics within Islam are, clinging to their power, and they fear, again, back to that, dangerous four-letter F word, fear that the asking of questions will, undermine their power and their control. But the deeper answer to that question, and I'll keep it brief, is that Arab tribal culture has sort of lorded it over the faith of Islam. And in fact, when you separate what the Quran says from what cultural traditions are, you realize, holy moly, there is so much more forward-looking thought in the Quran than there is in what is being practiced by Muslims.
So what you're saying, you talk about the kind of tribal culture, that aspect the two have kind of come together and been melded together
over the centuries.
In a way that maybe is not actually rooted in the text.
Right. Now, that's not to say, and believe me, I'm the last person to whitewash, that's not to say that there are no retrograde passages in the Quran. My goodness, there are. But what is so interesting, and I've done the count myself, is that there are multiple times more, 3 times as many verses in the Quran calling on Muslims to think and analyze and rethink than there are verses that expect us to, obey blindly. And 3 times as many verses about thinking and the need for that than submitting. Most Muslims don't know this.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, when you talk about thinking versus submitting or obeying, kind of political unrest, the Arab Spring comes to mind, right?
Sure.
When you're talking about kind of this backlash against authoritarianism in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people saw that as a sign of hope, maybe along these lines, and I'm wondering what your thought process was.
I have what some people may term a very optimistic view about the Arab Spring, which is that it actually succeeded in one way, and that is there was a wall of fear that enveloped Arab society up until those uprisings took place. And after those uprisings were, sort of tamped down, that wall of fear did not go back up. That wall of fear has disappeared. The problem within the Arab Spring is that there was no leadership to articulate what the young demonstrators wanted. There was, of course, as with every demonstration we know about, a wide range of hopes and aspirations that people had. But the one aspiration that they all shared, absolutely shared, was that they wanted more freedom, less authoritarianism. But today, so many, university-age students are unwilling to take leadership positions. And I have to say, maybe, I hope this isn't a lecture from an old person, but I have to say I think that's a huge mistake. Because then the people you're trying to influence, those who are in power, don't hear a clear, concise message from a recognized source. And therefore, it's so much easier for them to dismiss what demonstrators want.
And that, I think, applies really broadly. I mean, here
Totally.
at USC, we have a lot of concerns about tuition hikes and tuition costs and these kinds of things. So what you're saying is that kind of to revolt against, if you will, means that you have to come together.
Well, you do have to come together, and here's the other point. You can't be afraid of the word leadership. See, my experience with students, and I've taught a lot of students, is that leadership has been so corrupted as an idea.
Why?
Because of what leaders, or what I like to call misleaders, have done with it. It seems like take a look at the choices we have in this election. They're crappy choices, to be perfectly blunt. There's very little enthusiasm for Hillary, much passion for Trump, but not among young people, and thank God for that, I must say. But that, with that said, both of them are masters at lying through their teeth. Both of them have done, frankly, very suspicious things with money. And when we apply the word leader to either of them, it doesn't feel right. I would term both of them misleaders rather than leaders. And the thing is that because we have so many of these kinds of people in positions of power, whether it's corporate America, whether it's even the not-for-profit world, and believe me, there ain't too many saints there either, my friend, a lot of your generation, I think, sort of reaches a conclusion that leadership itself is dirty and we don't want to have a part of it.
Or perhaps that people who then say they do want to go into that are going into it for the wrong reasons.
Exactly, exactly, and will inevitably be corrupted. And while there's always that possibility, the fact is that if the message of any demonstration is inchoate and you can't pin it down easily, you're not going to be taken seriously by those who you're seeking to influence. So I say, it does take moral courage for a genuinely decent person or people to step up and say, I can do this. I want to work with all of you in bringing our messages together. Tell me what you want me to represent, and I will do my very best to represent that.
So how does one do that? I mean, I know you often come as a representative of more reformist view of Islam, and this applies more broadly. How do you kind of incorporate a lot of different ideas into your thinking? How do you come from a group of 20 people who have 20 different things they want and say, okay, we're going to all come together behind one person?
Not so much behind one person, but behind one message. And, people in power don't meet with a message. They meet with other people. And so the way you sort of carry that forward, carry that as a message, is you've got to be humble enough to be open to being criticized, to not take criticism totally personally. Sometimes it is very personal, but again, you've got to have resilience, and don't just be sort of settle for saying to people, okay, I'm listening to you. Ask them questions too, right? So that the people who are getting behind you, or you want to get behind you, also know that they are part of shaping how you represent that message. You may never be accepted as a leader. Okay, fine. But nobody can say that you didn't try with everything you knew how to do. And frankly, again, keep in mind the end goal, which is actually to influence the particular cause that this demonstration or this movement is about. And just remember, folks in power don't meet with ideas. They meet with fellow human beings.
And I know one of the things we were talking about earlier was specifically about some students who came to you in regards to the Black Lives Matter protests. And they talked about, sometimes it's tough to get your ideas or to get that kind of even atmosphere of communicating to a group. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I'll give you a story.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, a couple of young African American men showed up at my office door, and they said, Professor, we know that you teach this thing called moral courage, doing the right thing in the face of your fears, and we need some advice. They told me how they were wanting to engage with police, to know, not to absolve the police, but to understand where the police are coming from, what's going through their minds and through their hearts when they pull the trigger or they do a takedown. And one of them said to me, feminists have come to realize that they need the buy-in of men in order to have social change, right? Similarly, don't we need the buy-in of police to reach our ultimate objectives? I thought that was a great analogy. But then they said, and this is the kicker, that when we raise this point within the movement itself, we are told that we are sellouts, we are self-hating black men, we are Uncle Toms. And so here's the dilemma we find ourselves in. If I shut up, then I'm betraying my conscience. If I speak up, then I'm told I'm betraying my movement. What am I supposed to do? And this is a case where the leadership within that movement is not humble enough to say, okay, you know what? We don't want to meet with the police, but if you do, go do it. And tell us what you've learned from that experience.
And have the moral courage to bring it up and then to do it.
Precisely.
So moral courage is one of the topics we want to hit on in our second segment. Also to talk about this event you have coming up, Forbidden Questions About Islam. I want to ask you what you think some of those questions are.
All right.
Coming up after this break here on See You at USC.
joining us on today's first episode of Balance.
Welcome back to See You at USC. Thanks for sticking around with us. We're talking with Irshad Manji about forbidden questions about Islam. It's her event coming up this Thursday at 6 p.m. on November 3rd in Wallace Annenberg Hall. That's the new Annenberg building. And I want to ask you, what are these forbidden questions that you're talking about?
Well, frankly, any question that anybody has ever had that they felt they couldn't express because I'll be called a racist, a bigot, an Islamophobe, whatever. And so, for example, I kid you not, on Twitter today, I got a question: what's up with Muslim men carrying bottles into washroom stalls? And I tweeted back, for the sake of hygiene, Muslims wash after doing our business. And so watering, water cans or bottles are what holds the water, and that's why we bring it into the stalls. Now, that may be sort of weird and, like way too personal, TMI kind of thing, but actually, that's the kind of question that people who observe any other people have. And who else are they going to ask? And when would you ask until somebody actually invited you to table any question, and I will be happy to engage it or address it non-defensively. Like, I think we need more of those opportunities, in our society, because honestly, this is my core belief that diversity is very superficial until it includes diversity of thought. And that means, just by looking at you, a proverbial, white guy, I don't know what you actually believe, and why should I assume what you actually believe? Why wouldn't I use my freedoms to engage you and ask you questions, and you ask me questions? If we don't, then frankly, our diversity is not all that inclusive.
So I want to ask you some questions, if you don't mind. So one of the things you talk about in your flyer is, is extreme vetting something that we've seen Donald Trump call for okay? Right. Is this something that should be allowed? And I know in your background, you say that a lot of issues are, within the religion of Islam are caused by Muslims themselves, and there are violent aspects. So the question on your own flyer, is extreme vetting okay then, if you have such a part of the religion that has these views?
Frankly, at this point in history, I think that allowing what Trump calls, though it's not Trump I would want to be doing this, but what he calls extreme vetting, I think is necessary, not just to keep America safe, but also to bring down the emotional defenses of those who do fear Muslims in this country. Like, if you have nothing to hide, why wouldn't you be willing to put yourself in front of somebody who's going to interrogate you in depth? Why wouldn't you be willing to do that?
So how does that align with a lot of people would say that is against the very basic principles this country was founded upon.
Okay,
we're welcoming.
I would
to other
ask.
people.
Sure, you can be welcoming and inquisitive at the same time.
And what about the targeting specifically? Like, should the inquisition or the vetting apply more broadly than just to Muslims?
Absolutely, it should.
Because there are people who are Christian and people who are Jewish and people who don't have any
Absolutely,
faith
you bet. And there is no one group in this country or in any other country that has never had acts of violence mar its reputation.
KKK is
that exactly right.
Exactly
right. So the point is that if security matters to you as a citizen, then extreme vetting, as again it's called, but frankly I think it's just making sure that you're asking more questions, and obviously the right questions. Let me just say this much more. When Trump talks about this ideological test, do you believe in so-called American values or Sharia law? Can I ask you this? Who the hell is going to answer that question honestly if their intention in coming to this country is to bomb, a place? Like, how do you get them to answer that honestly?
Right.
It's so stupid, his ideological test. So what I am saying is, vet. Vet deeply, vet thoroughly, and be smart about it, not stupid.
Right, and don't cast the kind of necessarily blanket net, but do it in a kind of responsible way, is it?
Sure, responsible way. I'll tell you what's not responsible. When I applied for my U.S. green card only a couple of years ago, I put in all the paperwork, 2 years, my friend, of, legal work. Got it in. State Department gave me the all clear. When I had to cross back into the United States in order to be a legitimate permanent resident in this country, a Customs and Border Patrol officer stopped me. He looked me up and he said, not only am I going to deny you your green card, but I am going to suggest that you be charged with fraud. I'm like, what? You know what I learned later from the Customs and Border Patrol people is that he looked up my Wikipedia profile. He saw the word Islam and Muslims. He had no idea, because he didn't look any further, that I actually advocate for reform within Islam. He saw Islam and Muslims and decided I must be a threat to this country. That's stupid.
Yeah.
That's not extreme vetting. That is just being, horrifically dumb. And so if we are going to go ahead with extreme vetting, let us vet ourselves first. Trump, vet yourself. Ask yourself, what am I actually wanting to accomplish with this? And how can we do it in a way that is humane, is responsible, and is effective? Because what he is suggesting is just plain idiotic.
So I want to ask you another question too, talking about reforming Islam.
Yeah.
Specifically, I would imagine a lot of wide-ranging things, but we've seen a lot of, talking about the stigma in the United States about terrorism and these kinds of things. How would you go about changing that? How would you go about changing both the stigma and actually the small pockets of existence that exist?
Sure. So one thing I've learned over the many, many years that I've been advocating for reform in my faith is that young people who are like potential gang members of any kind, who are vulnerable to recruitment, need a steady presence in their life of people who are going to sit them down and ask them, tell me what's going on in your life. What's going through your heart? What's going through your head? What questions do you have?
What's upsetting you right
What's
now?
upsetting you? And what's making you feel great, right? Somebody who deeply cares, because many of these recruits feel like they don't belong to anything, and so they're susceptible to like this grand story of glory that they can be a part of. Right. The other thing I just passionately advocate, and it goes right back to the event that I'm going to be holding on November the 3rd, Forbidden Questions About Islam, is that people, Muslims and non-Muslims, need to know that they've got the permission to ask controversial and taboo questions without fear of being judged for doing so.
So you've asked a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
You've asked a lot of controversial and taboo questions and have been judged and have
Sure.
had backlash against
Yeah.
you. At what point do you say, my views are so different from the mainstream views of this religion that I'm no longer part of this religion?
At no point. At no point. Because here's the thing. Like it or not, I do believe in God. And my interpretation of Islam is that we worship one God, not God's self-appointed ambassadors like imams and other clerics. And so, nobody can legitimately walk around and claim that they've got the truth, which means, in turn, that we as Muslims have got to be, more than willing to contribute to societies in which we can disagree with one another in peace and with civility. Why? Because anything less means that somebody is playing God. And that is the central kind of, a crossing of the line in Islam. So I figure that, if you do believe in a universal God, one that the Quran tells us in 29 out of 30 chapters is a God of mercy and compassion, then you are a Muslim. If you choose to identify as such, now go out, make your case, do it non-violently, be ready to take criticism for it, and show that it's possible to be both humble and confident at the same time.
And I'm laughing a little bit because you say, disagree in a civil way in an open society, and That seems like that's a tough thing to do these days.
Of course it's tough.
Really, not just with this issue, but across issues.
You bet. It's always been tough. You know why? Because speaking truth to power doesn't just mean that the power is out there. It also means that the power is inside here, our egos. And it's our egos that compel us to cling to one identity. And if we cling to just one identity, African American, Muslim, woman, gay, whatever, then anything that seemingly offends, what I'm supposed to be as a gay person or as an African American or as a Muslim, will mean that, it feels like you're attacking my humanity.
Right, you're attacking the very essence of who I am.
Right, and that is not the case when people come from a place of curiosity with their questions. Even when they disagree with your answer, they are, engaging the ideas. They are not demeaning your humanity. Again, as long as it comes from a place of curiosity, I genuinely want to understand rather than a place of hostility, which is, I'm right, you're wrong, end of story, bye.
Right, and that's when you kind of have the conflict
Yeah.
and discussion. So let's talk, we have about a minute left. Let's talk a little bit about this event. Forbidden Questions About Islam. It's Thursday the 3rd at 6 p.m. in the new Annenberg building.
Right.
What do you expect to have happen?
I really hope that all kinds of people, Muslim, non-Muslim, will ask provocative questions. And my other hope is that people will leave that event saying, oh my God, I've got to ask questions about myself and not just about my views, about what others think. Because in sort of getting to the point of, transcending our fears of one another, we've also got to know who we are, so that we can bring our emotional defenses down.
Self-reflection.
So,
really
and self-knowledge, so that we can bring our defensive down and be open to other people asking us, what is up with that?
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to the event. Thank you for joining us here on CU at USC. Good night.
Check us out at TrojanVision.com and like us on Facebook.